So today we are talking about Unit 5, Concept 4. It's the last concept in the whole course. Whoa! Craziness. So what we're looking at today is something called water scarcity. Scarcity means that we don't have enough of something, that we're lacking something. So our LAQ says, how does access to water affect or play a role in a region's development? So basically, we're thinking about the fact that humans depend on water. If you think back to our human environment interaction words, humans depend on water, but as we've seen and as we will see, humans have also modified the environment a lot in order to get the water, but then that's having an impact on the environment, and we're going to look at that as well. So in your yellow pit. All right, so the first word is water scarcity. Water scarcity occurs when a region lacks or doesn't have enough of the necessary supply of water for the needs of the people there. Water scarcity means we don't have enough water. So once you have your definition down, the first thing is, if you look in your packet, it says water scarcity under our definition column, and then in extra notes, I've actually put the word causes. So I want you to leave that blank for now. As you go through this lesson, you're going to uncover some of the causes for water scarcity, and I want you to add those there. So right now you're leaving it blank. That'll come into play later on in the lesson. So looking at this map, this is a map of water scarcity in the world. In order to understand the map, we need to look at its key. That's right. We need to look at the key in order to understand what we're seeing on the map. So you'll notice that the different colors refer to how much water scarcity is going on in that region. So if it's purple, it's little or none. So for instance, if we look where Delaware is, I just drew a giant X over basically the whole east coast of the United States. So that's where we live. So you see that it's purple. So our region, we really don't experience widespread water scarcity. We have enough water to meet the needs of our people. Same with Europe, same with most of South America, and same with a good chunk of Australia and Russia. If you look at the red, it says physical water scarcity. What that means is that the physical land doesn't have enough water for the people that live there. So you'll notice that in regions like the western part of the United States and Mexico, where there's a lot of desert. You'll notice it in northern Africa, where there's a lot of desert. The Middle East has a lot of physical water scarcity because there's a lot of deserts in the Middle East. And we see it in central China, and we see it in the desert region of Australia as well. If you notice this like yellowish green color, that says economic water scarcity. What that basically is saying is that that region is not developed or wealthy enough, doesn't have enough money in order to really get the water to where it needs to go. So we see that in Africa, we see a little bit of that in India and Southeast Asia, and we see it in Central America. So what that's saying is those regions are poorer and they have less technology, less infrastructure, they're not as developed, so it's harder for them to get the water that they need. This orange category, which I'm going to use blue because I don't have an orange pen. What that is talking about is areas that are approaching physical water scarcity, meaning the land, something is going on in that land, in that region. That means that that land is slowly or quickly losing its water resources. So we see that still in Asia and the Middle East, the United States, on the west coast of South America, Africa, and then like a little bit in Europe. These are areas where the land is drying up, so they're losing their natural resources. All right, your next word is famine. Famine means a widespread scarcity of food, meaning we don't have enough food, often the result of water scarcity. So famine is going to be an effect of water scarcity, and you're going to need to know that later on. It's a result of water scarcity. So once again, we have a map that shows areas that are at risk, this map shows how at risk an area can be for experiencing famine. So basically, if you look at our key, the darker the color, the more famine is present in that particular region. So if you look for the areas or the countries that are red, that means that there's likely a lot of famine that's going on in that area. So one of these countries you should recognize. So a lot of them are in Central Africa. One of them is South Sudan. And that should make sense from when we learned about South Sudan, because South Sudan lacks a lot of technology, infrastructure, and resources, so it's harder for them to be able to address the needs of their population. Orange is kind of the next level, which we see a lot of that in Africa, and we also see it in Asia. Yellow is kind of medium risk, which we see that in Asia and South and Central America. Green is we're fine. And we see that in North America, Europe, and Australia, which should make sense because those are kind of our main areas where we have developed countries. So developed countries aren't really going to experience famine. Developing countries or developing regions like Africa, Asia, and Central and South America, we're going to see famine much more frequently. Okay, your next word is irrigation. This should sound familiar because we talked about it in concept 1. This is an example when we look at that's terrible H. When we look at human environment interaction, took me a second to find the eraser. When we looked at human environment interaction, irrigation was an example of a modification. Something that humans do that modifies the environment. Irrigation means methods of infusing water into the ground. Irrigation can be a cause of water scarcity. So not only do I want you to write down the definition of irrigation, but I also want you to write irrigation in that extra notes box for water scarcity under causes. Don't write it so big that it takes up the whole box because there's going to be more causes later on. So irrigation, if you remember from concept 1, it could be something as simple as you watering a plant to something as dramatic and expansive as a whole, food network system in which we have huge hoses that we use to bring water in from other locations in order to make the ground better for planting. All right, so our next word is drought. Hopefully we've heard of this word before. Drought is basically a period of prolonged lack of rainfall. You are in a drought you are in a drought if it has been a certain amount of time where you have not had rain. So of course we need rain in order to help our soil so that we can grow food. We need rain in the cycle of, the water cycle to help replenish our rivers, our lakes, our streams, so that we have consistent water supply. So if we're going through a drought, that means we're going to have issues getting water and potentially see more water scarcity. So what this map is showing is by country how the country's experience in terms of drought. So if it's this dark, almost really like maroon, that means that that country is experiencing a very intense and severe drought. So we see that with Mexico. We see that with a lot of countries in the Middle East, India, South Africa. The middle red, which I accidentally crossed out, is kind of like they're not in a constant state of drought quite yet, but they've had a really long period of drought, so they're kind of approaching that status of just being in complete drought. And we see that in South America, lots of sub-Saharan Africa, and other countries in the Middle East. Historic drought means that it's kind of a part of this country's history that they deal with drought. So we see that in Australia, China, the US, Argentina. So these are countries that, maybe they have drought for other reasons than just, a severe weather change. All right, desertification. We've actually talked about this word before. We talked about it when we talked about the Sahara Desert and the Sahel. So I'll touch on that in a second. But desertification is the process of land turning into a desert, mainly due to droughts. It is super important that you understand that an area that is going through desertification is not a desert yet. Make sure you have that in your notes. An area that's going through desertification is not a desert yet. Therefore, the Sahara Desert is not an area that is going through desertification because it's already a desert. Areas that are going through desertification are going to be this yellow color on our key. The red are areas that are already desert. The green are areas that we're not worried about. Yellow are areas that are going through this process of desertification, and it's possible that if, it continues to be a problem and they don't get enough rainfall or water, they're going to become a desert. Okay, so our desert areas, you see the Sahara Desert, we see desert areas in western United States, Australia, the Middle East. The yellow areas are the key areas that say, okay, these are areas that they're going through desertification, and it's possible that they might, finish that process and become a desert. The main area I want us to remember is kind of that belt that surrounds the Sahara Desert. That's called the Sahel. So in your yellow packet, you'll see you have the box for desertification, and then you have the extra notes I've added where it takes place. I want to make sure that you add the Sahel, S-A-H-E-L, which is that area right next to, the Sahara Desert. So make sure you add that to your notes as a really good example of a place that's going through desertification. I actually have that on this slide. So you don't have to write down the definition of Sahel, but I would like for you to have that in your notes for desertification as this area that's going through desertification. Sahara is already a desert. Sahara is not going through desertification. The Sahel is. Okay? So that's all your vocab for Concept 4. That was your last word ever in global studies. So what you're going to do today is you're going to look at some examples of water scarcity, and you're going to make sure that you understand the causes and effects. That's the big goal for today, is to make sure you understand the causes of water scarcity and the effects of water scarcity. All right, so go back to Schoology and go on to the next task. And this is your last vocab video.